now. All right, have a wonderful webinar, and I'll be in touch with all of you afterwards.
Thank you. Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I am Geoff Garver, a instructor and researcher at McGill University and Concordia University in Montreal. And it's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's Ecological Law and Governance webinar on the circular economy. Is the circular economy model fit for the ecological transition? I'm very fortunate to be joined here by three top-notch panelists, Professor Massimiliano Montini, the University of Siena, Rodrigo Andrade of the Climate Reality Project, and Professor Patricia Marti, also of the University of Siena. So the circular economy is certainly becoming front and center within the sustainable development discussion, and it raises some very interesting questions in regard to the issues that we have been dealing with in ELGA regarding the need for an ecologically just transition. It's challenging in many respects in that the goals of reducing waste, moving towards a more regenerative economy with zero waste is the ultimate goal. It seems like certainly consistent with the ideas within ecological law, and yet some aspects of the circular economy model are being developed within a sustainable development model, or a development model overall that still is insisting on economic growth, and we're also dealing with many non-renewable resources where the circular economy has limits. So these are some of the issues I think we'll be looking at today, and we will kick things off with Massimiliano Montini. He'll talk about the European Union approach to the circular economy within the ecological transition. Massimiliano is professor of European Union Law and Sustainable Development Law at the University of Siena. He's also the coordinator of the Monet module, EU Law and Circular Economy for Sustainable Development, and he's co-director of the research group of Regulation for Sustainability. He is vice chair of ELGA and a founding member of the steering committee, and he's also a member of several international scientific networks. His main research interests relate to international and European Union environmental law, with a special focus on that transition from environmental law to ecological law, regulation for sustainability, the circular economy, and climate change. So Massimiliano, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Geoff, for this very nice presentation. And thanks to people who have been organizing with us this webinar, and for all the people that are here listening. And so I will start by sharing the screen, and so now you should be able to see my presentation. Just let me put it full screen, so it should be okay now. So what I will do to kick off this meeting is to present the European Union approach to the circular economy in the framework of the so-called ecological transition. We will see then at the end with some critical remarks on what the European Union is doing in this field, whether this fits within the model of ecological approach that we have been investigating within ELGA during the last few years. So first of all, a very brief presentation on the concept of circular economy for those who might not be familiar with that. The basic idea of the circular economy is to close the loop of the product life cycle, starting from the idea of reusing and recycling products and recovering materials. So on the one side, it is founded on the idea of reducing waste, on the zero waste objective, as it is called sometimes in the language of the European Union, which may have a positive effect in itself. But then more recently, the European Union has been moving from an approach to circular economy mostly focused on the let's say end pipe and so on the reduction of waste, and has been thinking seriously on how to boost a different way of producing goods, and so trying to push a better design of products so that product can be better fit within a circular economy approach. So it's not only about the end of the life cycle of products, but is much more, it should be much more about the eco-design of products, so that less materials may be used and more materials can be reused and recycled. So this is more or less the idea. You can see here a simple picture of what should be like a system of circular economy based on a correct design and production of product, whereby residual waste is very limited and most of products are either reused, repaired, or collected and recycled, so that there is a lower need of new raw materials to be put into the process. What is the context whereby we are operating? We can say that the circular economy approach fits into the international SDGs move. In fact, it is perfectly in line with the SDG 12 in particular. As you know, SDG 12 is about sustainable consumption and production patterns. So the circular economy perfectly fits into this system, so is very much related to the idea of decoupling economic growth from environmental degradation and from the use of new resources. And this is something we might be discussing, whether this is in itself enough, let's say, or whether there should be a more detailed analysis of how this can happen and how this can contribute to a different approach to our economic development patterns. In the European context, there has been some moves. I will briefly mention that some moves to move toward the a circular economy approach and move away from a linear economy approach in the past, since 2015. But the major let's say change of perspective seems to be related to the recent develops in European environmental policy, which has started with the when the new European Commission took office in 2019. The European Commission, for those of you who are not familiar with the European legal system, is the governing body. It is the executive power at European Union level, and is obviously very important the direction that the European Commission is giving to the European policy. The new Commission was very keen on promoting the Green Deal among its priorities for the period 2019-2024, which will be the period the Commission will be in office. And within the Green Deal, there is a tendency to reshape existing policies, and a important part of this Green Deal movement is related to the promotion of a move towards a circular economy. So in between, I just wanted to mention very briefly that investigating on the circular economy as part of a project financed by the European Union itself, which is mostly a teaching project about including debates about the circular economy into the normal teaching in our mostly postgraduate courses at the University of Siena, but also part of a series of webinars and seminars in connection also with different institutions. And why I say that? Because this is part of my belief that law can play a relevant role into the shift for an ecological transition, for a new approach. And that's why I think it's also worth investigating whether or not the circular economy may really contribute to a broader shift of our economy, or whether it is an experience in itself, let's say, and so it's important to see how much this is related to a broader change of perspective that is being advocated by ecological approaches to law. As going back to the Green Deal of the European Union, as you can see, this is conceived as the new growth strategy of the European Union for the period up to 2030 and later, and now the European Union is starting a planning, an economic planning model whereby the reference long-term perspective is the year 2050, where the EU wants to achieve carbon neutrality, and there is an intermediate date at 2030. Within this major change of the European approach to the economy as a whole, it is also now embedded the work for the move from a linear to a circular economy. And so a major point in this approach is to decouple economic growth from resource use. And this is a matter that we might be discussing further, maybe later after the presentation and the discussion, if there is time. As to the key points of this European approach to circular economy, I should say that looking at the approach advocated by the European Commission, there are three pillars, three main objectives which underpin the Green Deal and more generally underpin the European approach. These three pillars are described here as carbon neutrality. As I say, the EU has this major goal, which is now starting to influence all other policies of the European Union to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050, which means mostly reducing emissions and promoting a decarbonization of the European economy, but it will also include, for example, an improvement of forestry activities and an improvement of sinks on the one side, and also the use of new technologies in order to promote carbon absorption. And this is a huge area that is still to be correctly understood. There will be a lot of moves in this area, and the environmental and ecological implications are still yet to be correctly understood, and also the contribution of law will need to be better understood in this field. But this is the flagship initiative of the European Union with this long-term perspective 2050, and this was also driving the position recently of the European Union in the Glasgow COP26. The second main pillar is the circular economy. The European Union wants to promote a shift from a linear to a circular economy approach within the framework of a move towards a more sustainable type of development in the European context. And then the third pillar is called zero pollution. I'm a bit critical about this title because it might be a bit misleading. It is in fact about revising and assessing how the traditional environmental legislation is working at the European Union level, and look at a revision of maybe air, water, and soil legislation and more generally environmental legislation to see whether whether it fits within these new goals promoted by the Green Deal. I do not expect that zero pollution will be achieved anywhere, but certainly there is an interest of a more integrated approach. This is a good news for environmental protection, which has been, environmental protection policies have been quite isolated in recent times from other main economic policies. So this might be a good news, but it's yet to be seen how this will make its way, this idea, into legislation, and whether there will be proper integration of environmental protection goals with the more general carbon neutrality and circular economy objectives. And of course, it needs to be seen which is the main, let's say, approach towards ecological environmental protection. And I will say something about that in the final slides. Now I want very briefly to give you a glimpse of the evolution of the European policy on the circular economy here on the slides, which are meant also for reference for those of you who maybe wish to know more about that. So I make a reference to the original first action plan of 2015 of the European Union. Then the European Union between 2018 and 2019 decides to focus mostly on the reduction of plastics and approved an interesting directive on the ban of certain single-use plastic products. And this is a first move to try to reduce the very important problem of plastic pollution and mostly marine litter related to plastic pollution. And it might be interesting to see whether there are similar moves in other parts of the world that you might be recalling during the discussion. And so this was the first part of the approach. Then there is a second step in the approach of the European Union towards the circular economy, which is related to the already mentioned Green Deal, and so is related to this new growth strategy. It might be a bit, let's say, debatable whether it's correct to use growth strategy instead of using maybe other terms like more sustainable human development, for example, in this field. But the main reason, I guess, for this is that the EU wanted to integrate the traditional growth agenda of the European Union with the sustainable development agendas, which in the past were a bit separated. And after the approval of the SDGs and after the approval of the Green Deal, which is perceived as a way to implement the SDGs within the European policies, the European Union felt adequate to speak about a new growth strategy based on this Green Deal approach. Whether this is correct or not is debatable, as I say, but this is the way the European Union is presenting its policy. And in March 2020, the new Circular Economy Action Plan was approved. And there you can see some hints here. One, and I try to highlight what some issues which seems to me worth being discussed. For example, this concept that the approach to the circular economy so far has been an approach played by pioneers in Europe, and the idea of the European Commission is trying to find a way that we move from front runners to mainstream economic players, moving from a linear to a circular economy approach. Then the other point is to link the circular economy approach to climate neutrality on the other side, and from decoupling economic growth from resource use. And the other point is to link it somehow to the change in production and consumption patterns, which resembles the language of SDG 12, and link it to a transition progressive yet irreversible transition towards a sustainable economic system. Whether this is enough to make European Union steer the move towards a new approach to human development is still to be seen. And so I go towards the conclusion of this brief analysis because I don't want to take too much time. I'm rather keen of having some discussion on these. So why I decided to present the European approach to circular economy? First of all, because I'm currently working on these issues, trying to investigate how the European Union is moving in this direction. And it will be interesting to compare these with similar initiatives in other parts of the world. So I'm not claiming that the European approach might be better than others, because in fact, I do not know enough details on what is happening about circular economy in other parts of the world, but certainly at least the European Union has made its proposals, and now is to be seen whether these proposals go or not in a right direction. So one possible way to look at that is to see whether we are happy with the approach behind the scene, let's say. So for example, if you look, if you read through the lines, all the documents of the European Union regarding the Green Deal and the action plans on the circular economy, one critical point I can see is that we might say most of the approach of the EU is probably still too much embedded into an anthropocentric approach, which may be understandable from a European perspective, but maybe if you place that into a global perspective, it's a bit, let's say, old-fashioned as an approach. It's a bit traditional, if you want to use let's say, a more gentle term. And then the problem might be that this approach of the European Union towards circular economy, although it, as I said, it has positive features, it might be, it might not have enough courage to contribute to the shift towards a new economic paradigm that is probably needed and that we have been investigating in our ELGA seminars and webinars and congresses, and which puts at the center of the picture the protection of the health and integrity of the ecosystem. There is sometimes some reference to ecosystem protection in the language of the Green Deal. There is a tendency to use the term ecological transition or green transition. I'm not completely sure that the understanding of the European Union about ecological transition, although this is used sometimes at European Union level, it is used in some member states of the European Union. For example, in Italy, where I work, it is now widely used in national politics, and also our Ministry for Environmental Protection was renamed Ministry of Ecological Transition in the light of the application of the European Green Deal. But I might still, I still have some doubts whether there is the same understanding that I would have of an ecological transition within the economic approach. And so this is another possible critical feature. And then I say, if I compared it with what we have been investigating as a correct ecological approach, for example, I think in Europe, there is not enough discussion about the need that all these shifts and changes should be placed in a context where humans and humanity recognizes the responsibility to act in order to address the ecological crisis. I've been arguing in some writings that we should move from an age based on rights, a focus on rights of humans, to an age where there is a blended approach of rights and responsibilities. So humans should recognize their responsibilities, and humans should recognize that they are an inherent part of ecosystem in which they live. And also, I think carbon neutrality and the circular economy should be placed within this context. So there are many things we can do, many directions we can go, which may be right, but I'm not sure that we are moving in that direction with the right mindset, with the new mindset, I would say. I'm not sure we are following what Thomas Berry was advocating of promoting and trying to achieve a mutually enhancing human-earth relationship. So in this way, I recall some recent activities that we have been promoting also within ELGA, whereby we are working on this idea that humans should become trustees of nature and promote new legal approaches aimed to protect the health and integrity ecosystem as a prerequisite for any sound path of sustainable human development. So a human development whereby the human dimension is embedded into an ecosystem dimension, and there is a blended way of flourishing both for human and ecosystem, because humans are part of ecosystems. I think if the circular economy approach will be placed within this new mindset, it's certainly a good direction to go. If not, it might be still worth moving from, or trying to move from, a linear approach to a circular approach, but maybe this will not be enough to address the ecological crisis which we are living in, which is first of all an ecological crisis alongside a climate crisis, an energy crisis, and so on. So I would say I will stop here to leave enough time to my colleagues who will be speaking after this presentation, and also hopefully to leave some time for an interesting discussion. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you so much, Massimiliano, for giving us that very clear picture of what the circular economy means in Europe, in the broader context there, and the framing that is being done from an institutional perspective in Europe, while also raising these really interesting questions about context and whether the circular economy and related policy objectives and initiatives are going to be superficial, or whether they're going to be attached to a more fundamental paradigm shift that may be necessary to have a truly just ecological transition. So save your questions on that very interesting set of points that Massimiliano made for the discussion. And in the meantime, we will now turn to Rodrigo Andrade. And Rodrigo is the Latin American climate leader of the Climate Reality Project, which is linked to Al Gore. He is the co-founder of the Latin American Energy Dialogue NGO, and is with also the Latin American Sustainable Leadership platform, LATAM Sustentable. He directs the Sustainability and Climate Change Commission of the Grand Lodge of Chile, and the Higher Diploma in Climate Change, Ethical Challenges for Public Policies for the Latin American faculties. So Rodrigo is in Glasgow, fresh off of a set of discussions that certainly are related to the circular economy. So Rodrigo, welcome, and we're all ears to have for what you have to tell us today.
Ciao to my Geoffrey. Thank you so much, Geoffrey. Mari Pulamien, Mari Pupeñi, Mari Compuche. Good afternoon to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I said good afternoon to everyone in my native language, the Mapuche's people language. And I want to share with you some ideas about circular economy opportunities in Latin America. I don't have slides. I just to read some ideas to try to be sure that you can understand me, because it's not my native language, of course. So the circular economy has huge economic opportunities for developing countries. The World Economic Forum, in a publication with the Helen MacArthur Foundation, has estimated that the circular economy can mean savings of up to 1 trillion by 2025. And this is because preventing the generation of waste is a lot more efficient than taking care of them. The economy circular recognized that it is better to share a book with someone else to recycle their page to make a new copy. That it is better to design long life products, useful and easy to repair, that take care of waste electronics, that generates the paradigm of obsolescence schedules. And that it is better to take care of natural resources than to exhaust them through excessive use than attempts against its ability to regenerate. It has been estimated that this new way of producing and consuming has an economic potential of $4.5 trillion by 2030, and that could generate 95 million jobs globally. The transition to this model is being driven by various megatrends and challenges, including standout the threats posed by climate change and the degradation of ecosystems, especially in our continent, the scarcity of raw materials and natural resources, the development of new technologies that enable circular solutions, increasingly demanding regulations on waste, recycling, product designs, and plastics, international commitments such as the Goals of Sustainable Development, and increasingly informed citizenry and empowered. For the transitions to be fair, it will be essential to ensure that the circular economy that develops in Latin America is one that offers ample development opportunities for people and organizations, recognizing that this is not the case and that is everyone's job to ensure that it is so. It will be especially important to ensure that many new formal jobs are created in various economic sectors. A key indicator is the regeneration of new jobs in circular economy activities, such as the management of waste, repair, and maintenance of goods and products, specialized professional services, and more, some yet to be created. Several studies have analyzed the potential for creating new jobs presented by the circular economy. The Club of Rome estimated that by 2030, the circular economy could generate more than 300,000 new jobs in France, more than 200,000 new jobs in Spain, and more than 50,000 new jobs in Finland, for example. Likewise, the International Labour Organization estimated in 2018 that the transition could generate by 2030 and globally more than 50 million new jobs in global services and more than 45 million new jobs in waste management. These studies, also not available for Latin America, give an idea of the job creation potential of the circular economy. Based on them, it is proposed as the first goal that by 2040, the circular economy will have generated 180,000 new jobs in circular economy activities, and that by 2030, this will have already reached 100,000. The source of this study is proposal roadmap for a circular economy for a Chile without garbage 2020 and 2040. All these analyses were made prior to the coronavirus pandemic, where we collected powerful experiences. We all began small islands with certain productive capacities isolated from the rest. We relearned to do what we did before globalization. We developed innovation to solve problems that we previously solved with easy purchase that only mean greenhouse gas emissions via transport and asymmetries of all kinds. Island countries face this type of problems all the time with their own capacities and resources. regarding to the to the question of the webinar, that is the circular economy model fit for the ecological transition? Well, I have some doubts at the moment. I think the word transition does not apply on this specific moment. I think we have to think about transformation. We don't have more time to create new model economies or another very interesting ideas, but we have a strong delay. We have a big civilization problem, thinking about climate change, and the result of the COP26, as I told you before, create me some confusion, some doubts about the real objectives or real goals of the big companies and the rich countries. If they really want to transform our current situation to a better situation, I'm not sure of that at the moment. So I think circular economy is part of this review that we have to do. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. It's really useful to have a perspective from the Latin American context, along with the example that Massimiliano gave us from Europe, just as a reminder that a concept like the circular economy can't really be isolated to different regions. It really needs, if it's going to work, whether it's part of a just transition or not, on a global scale, because we have such an interconnected economy and so many, as you pointed out, asymmetries within that economy. So thanks for calling our attention to those points, and I hope those are other things we can discuss when the panel has concluded. And for those of you who are with us, and thank you for the questions we've received so far, you can put additional questions in the chat or save them when we open the floor to questions and comments after our third panelist. And we will now turn to our third panelist, Professor Patricia Marti, who is a professor of experience design at the University of Siena. She's director and rector's delegate of Santa Chiara, if I said that right, Fab Lab, where she manages several participatory innovation projects with external partners. Patricia has an interdisciplinary background in philosophy and computing and a PhD in interaction design. She was formerly visiting professor at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands, and her research activity concerns designing systems facing cultural, aesthetic, and social issues through embodied experiences. So Patricia, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us today. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I prepared some slides, so I will share my screen. I hope you can see. Let me go into full screen. I'm very glad to be here today, and thank you for inviting me, because I can talk about a different perspective, or an additional perspective to the ones that have been discussed and presented before. So I will talk about the Fab Lab movement and the way in which this is trying to contribute to the circular economy. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Fab Lab movement and the Fab Labs, let me start with this, what a Fab Lab is. Fab Lab means fabrication laboratory, or as the Americans say, the fabulous lab, the lab where you can do almost anything. This is the motto of this of the movement. The key points in the digital fabrication is the fact that you can create and fabricate stuff for personal use. So this is the perspective, the idea that people can produce whatever they need or whatever they like to produce just for themselves. The movement was born in the United States, the beginning of 2000, and at the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT. It was promoted by Neil Gershenfeld. Neil was really the initiator of this movement, and he had a really powerful vision. And the vision was to start a new technological revolution that consists in bringing together a large number of people who are not necessarily technology experts, but with the idea of starting together a creative process of designing and building artifacts by combining two components, so atoms and bits, the physical world with the digital world. So this is the vision Neil had, and he started this, started working around this idea. And let me read just a very short extract from this seminal article whose title is How to Make Almost Anything, the Digital Fabrication Revolution. This was published in 2012. So Neil said that a new digital revolution is coming, and this time is in fabrication. It draws on the same insight that led to the earlier digitization of communication and computation, but now what is being programmed is the physical world rather than the virtual one. So digital fabrication will allow individuals to design and produce tangible objects on demand, wherever and whenever they need them. So widespread access to these technologies will change traditional models of business, foreign aid, and education. So as I said, Gershenfeld envisioned this new revolution. So the idea of changing completely also the business model and starting from the very local, something that is local, that is fast and cheap to produce. So as I said, the motto of the digital fabrication and the Fab Lab movement is how to make almost anything. This is a picture that that I took when we inaugurated our Fab Lab at the University of Siena. Just to make this example, this is a chair that was designed by a designer in Brazil, and everything that is produced in the Fab Labs is open source. So we could download the 3D model of this chair, and we simply fabricated it. So no need to move stuff from one country to another one, but simply to move data, to move information, and to move knowledge about how to build new stuff. So this is a small example. Of course, we could even sell this kind of chairs. In that case, we have to pay the royalties to the designer, but the model is pretty simple. As I said, the movement started at the beginning of 2000, and now there are more than 1,570 Fab Labs in more than 100 countries in the world. So the movement is spreading very, very well. We are all connected in the same network, sharing ideas, projects, 3D models, coding. So this is really a network where people collaborate. And there are some cities who took the Fab Lab movement extremely seriously. One of these, just to make an example, about how this movement can contribute to the circular economy. So one of these city is Barcelona. Barcelona is a hub city of a very large number of small Fab Labs that are there to support the community, the local community in producing stuff. So the idea of the Fab Lab city is to create the city of the future, changing the way in which we produce stuff and we treat the waste. And the Fab Lab city, that is now a network of, if I remember well, something like 32 cities in the world who are adopting a different model of mass production. So the model is a transformation from the PITO model, that is product in, trash out, the model that we use nowadays, into the DIDO models. So data in, data out. So what is moved is not the physical stuff that produce a lot of pollution, but the idea is to move data. And the challenge of this project is to transform cities into self-sufficient entities in 2054. So in about 30 years, they envision this transformation into self-sufficient cities. So let me say something more about this DIDO model. As you can see, the Fab Lab play an important role. The production is local, but it's not just because it is locally produced, but the important point here is that the community knows the needs of citizens, and then the community is able to produce what people really need. And this means that the Fab Labs are not just places where things are developed, but they are also places where people co-design, co-create the stuff that they need. And of course, when you scale this model up a little bit, you stop sharing stuff or moving stuff, but you move knowledge. And the fact that the Fab Labs share the same kind of technology. We all have 3D printers, CNC machines for doing any kind of stuff, really. This means that something that is designed in a place in the world can be replicated quite easily in another part of the works of the world. So that's quite interesting to see. And this is how the idea of the Fab Lab City intend to change, to contribute to the circular economy. So giving to the Fab Labs this central role of spaces where people can go and design together and think together about potential solutions and share these solutions with other Fab Labs in the world. So that's a big challenge. The Fab City produced also a manifesto. I want to show this to you because I think that is important to underline, to highlight which are the principles behind this digital fabrication. And first of all, is people-centered. So the idea is to produce what people need or what people want or what they desire, but very locally. So having a more holistic view of needs and requirements from people is inclusive. The Fab Lab movement really works a lot around the idea of inclusion. I will show you some examples from my lab, from what we do in Siena in our Fab Lab. Is ecological. There is a lot of attention to sustainability and to the ecology. So we try to use only natural materials, so reducing the chemical stuff. And there is a lot of research around this. Everything is open source, as I said, and it's very experimental. So in the Fab Lab, we often take the risk of the research, some kind of risk that companies cannot take because they produce one model for a lot of people, and the Fab Labs do exactly the other way around. So they produce one single product for the person who would like to have it. So it's a completely different perspective. It is very participatory and very local, the kind of production. So let me move now to our Fab Lab. It is called Santa Clara Lab. It's a large facility in the very city center. Is part of a larger project of the University of Siena. Is an interdisciplinary innovation center where the mission is to make institutions, local institutions, public and private, and also companies or simply citizens to meet together and work together using the premises of the center. There are 5 main pillars in these centers. I'm responsible, I'm the director, as I said, of the Fab Lab and the digital area. Other areas of research and business are sustainability, agri-food, health, and learning and training. In our lab, there are different competencies because when you work with people, you really need to speak different languages. And so what we do is to try to start collaborative projects and innovative projects using the Fab Lab as an enabler, the technology in the Fab Lab as an enabler for immediately prototyping ideas and and check and see if they can solve some problems. So just to mention a few examples, as I said, we work a lot in accessibility and inclusion. This is a picture from one of several workshops that we ran with the deaf community in Siena. So deaf people are working with us for designing aids for them to hear some kind of sounds. So this is an example of this is a project that we developed. We developed smart jewels that are able to detect and recognize sounds in the environment and notify these sounds to the deaf person, but not with hearing aids or with a kind of prosthesis, because the deaf people told us that for them is also important to have beautiful stuff on their body. So aids that are designed to respect the gender, for example. And this is the reason why we started co-designing these jewels with them. So let me show you the, this is a suite of jewel that we design, and they can notify sounds with vibration, lights, and shape changes, and also using an app that can say which kind of sound has been notified. The Financial Times wrote a very nice article about this this project. Other kind of other examples are, for example, in healthcare. Surgeons, doctors come, dentists come to the Fab Lab to design aids or support for people, which they cannot find on the market, just because, for example, this is a face mask for children for the orthopedic correction of the maxillofacial disorders. And this is how children have to use the mask. The mask is very heavy and produce a lot of irritation on the skin. And we transformed, just working with children and the families and orthodontists in producing new face masks that are very light, that are made using biocompatible materials. And then the masks were transformed in superhero masks. And we now have a video game that is associated to the therapy. So the more the child wears the face mask, the more he or she can gain money for helping the superhero in during the challenges of the game. So, and for example, this is another project from the students. This is students from the master degree in communication strategies and technologies. She produced bioplastics from mark waste and started to design new products like this. And everything was fabricated in the Fab Lab. So this means that beside this, this prototyping activity, there is also a quite intense training activity we do together with other Fab Labs in the network, an academy, the Academy of Digital Fabrication, where Neil Gershenfeld is the coordinator. So he teaches most of the modules. So we try to provide people with the knowledge and skills for digital fabrication to contribute to this vision. And But if you want to see more about this and about our project and what we do in Siena, you can drop me an email on visit our social or the Fab Lab. But just to conclude about this, I think that this is a real challenge. But I think that we have to seriously rethink what we are doing with the environment, what we are doing with inclusion in our society. And maybe this way of thinking locally can really help to look at the problems that we have with completely different eyes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Patricia. And we're now at the point where we can consider some questions and comments. If I may, I'd like to lead off here, and then I'll turn to some questions that have been posted in the chat, and I invite others to do the same. So maybe building on some of the points that Massimiliano raised and some additional observations about all three presentations together, there is this potential challenge of linking the circular economy with perhaps broader mindset or paradigm changes about how humans relate to the earth and to the world and to our ecological context. You know, we're in an era where, especially in the last 50 to 60 years, many natural scientists call this the great acceleration, where the correlation between material and energy throughput with economic growth on one hand and with ecological impacts has been very tight. There's been a close correlation. So when we talk about the circular economy, decoupling impacts from growth, there's a few significant challenges. One is that really just going to buy time for a short while, given the amount of reductions in material and energy throughput, and especially the ecological impacts that's necessary to get back, for example, within planetary boundaries, within these big metrics of global, of ecological impacts of economic activity. Ecological footprint is another one of these metrics that shows us that we're over-consuming. So while you have SDG 8 that's designed to move us towards sustainable production and consumption, you also SDG 12, you also have SDG 8, which locks into the international formula for sustainable development, economic growth. And I saw that come up also in Patricia's picture of a city which is using the Fab Lab approach that it's designed to support sustainable growth within cities. But I think there's some important fundamental questions about whether that's possible. And in regard to the circular economy, there's this question, number one, first, of whether the decoupling will be sufficient, but also this well-known phenomenon of the Jevons paradox or the rebound effect, because circular economy is a lot about being more efficient, but we know from that paradox that one thing that happens is that you use more of the thing that you're becoming efficient in using. And then in terms of the Fab Lab, I mean, I'm so grateful to be learning of this, and the examples, Patricia, that you shared are really inspiring. But then when I hear something about people being able to produce whatever they want when they want it, well, so how do we prepare this to, controlling our wants and our desires so that we're living in an ecological approach? So and Rodrigo, maybe you have some things to add from your perspective from Chile and Latin America on those questions. But I wanted to start the discussions to give you all three an opportunity to respond a little to those kinds of challenges. Massimiliano, you want to start off?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank Geoff for these thoughts, which gives us some hints for a good start. I have to say, I have to thank both the speakers, but I'm always very fascinated from what Patricia presents, and she's from my same university, and we sometimes happen to be together at some speeches and talks, and it's always interesting to me because it's really a completely different perspective, and it's always nice to see what are the contact points on this issue. And on the I also share some of the doubts that Geoff was presenting on the. I find it fascinating, the Fab Lab movement in particular, because it may help people locally, and it may start from sharing ideas, but then producing locally, consuming locally. So in terms of the the carbon footprint, for example, is a great idea. Of course, I think we can probably, there is already some work being done on that, but it maybe was not very clear from the presentation. If there is an assessment also of the life cycle of these products being produced. For example, if you produce bioplastics, it's interesting. If you use waste, for example, it's obviously circular by definition. But for example, if you use wood, it would be interesting to see whether this wood, where is it coming from? If it is local, sustainable forestry, it's a very good idea. If then it happens, then some people import wood from China or somewhere else, from let's say some protected forest somewhere, as it happens unfortunately in Europe sometimes, then is probably something that you can improve, let's say, in this life cycle of products. So I think this is a part that maybe legal analysis might come in, because I'm happy when we talk about sustainable forestry, about life cycle, but I want to see what we can do to be sure that this is properly an ecological approach and is embedded into this correct ecosystem protection that we are trying to promote. So I think it's a good start. This idea of the Fab Labs, I think, is a great idea, because it helps to have these more local supply chains. And I think that for many respects, that's what we have learned probably from the pandemics, that we need to have smaller supply chains that reduces transport, reduces supply problems, and also helps community to develop their own tools and production. But of course, we need to maybe improve the life cycle assessment and improve also the role of law in terms of incentives and disincentives, in terms of probably taxation, or in terms of traditional command and control sometimes. So I think there is a place for let's say, developing stronger ties between probably the legal dimension, that the one I'm embedded into, and the let's say the more technological dimension on the side of the of what Patricia has been presenting. And then for maybe I can say something also about Rodrigo's presentation. It was very interesting to see the perspective of Latin America, and I'm sure we can even there try to understand a bit better, maybe not necessarily now, but it would be interesting to talk about that later on, to see whether it's circular economy or for example local production through Fab Labs may really be different from a Latin America perspective. It would be interesting to see whether you really think this might fit as it is in your context, or whether maybe you can see it or frame it in a different way, because this is maybe very helpful. I really, it's important to have local action, but really share ideas at the global level on these issues to try to move forward meaningfully. Thanks a lot, and I hope we can have more discussion about that.
Patricia,
Rodrigo, shall I go first?
go ahead, Patricia. And then we'll hear
Okay.
from Rodrigo.
There is so many questions, but first of all, just to make more clear what I presented, the kind of project that I presented, for example, the ones on the bioplastics, the student started with the idea of visiting the local vineyard, and so the bioplastic were made by Mark, so completely from waste. So waste that these companies producing wine, this is a problem they have. They don't know what to do with this, and so this is a way. This was a way to try to see if this material can be transformed and used to produce something different. So this is just to clarify the point. And we use a lot of recycled material because this is one of the mission of the Fab Lab, in the Fab Lab charter that you have to follow internationally. There is a lot of attention to this. So whenever it's possible to reuse something, you are encouraged to do it. There is a lot of research also when we use the filaments for the 3D printers. Either we use natural material or material that comes from plastic that are reused. So that they are transformed in filament and using for producing new objects that can be again transformed into filaments. Okay, so something that can be reused in several cycles. But it's true that even if there are a lot of people enthusiastic with this idea of the Fab Lab movement, there is no one model of production. There is no one model of reuse. So it would be very interesting to study this also from the point of view, the law point of view. Let me do an example. During the COVID, we worked a lot with hospital because they didn't have, you know, the protection masks or any kind of individual protection systems. So we had to produce a lot of these, a lot of respirators, because there were no enough, and especially with the first, during the first lockdown. And then we realized that we were doing something with no certification, and that there was no regulation about that. And so I think that if this production is not ruled, is not put in a more holistic view about how to certificate the stuff that the Fab Lab produce, how to rule the production, how to distribute, how to use and reuse. There is not much about that. We are still in this enthusiastic, I would say, idea of this, of producing what we need by ourselves. That is a powerful idea. And what I like a lot is the fact that people recognize the Fab Lab as a place where they can share their problems and where they can try to find solutions to their problems. Problems are very, very concrete and very simple. This is what I like about what we do. So it's not really theoretical. It's very concrete, very practical. And also to respond to, I think was Kathy, and she put a very interesting question, couple of interesting questions. She said in the question, but this is still a very technocratic view. Yes, it's true, because this started with technology and the new possibility of offered by the technology, but it's changing a lot. We see technology as an enabler for social innovation, and that's it. And we use for material technology for materializing idea, for making things concrete, so that it is easier for people to think about what they do, what they need, what stuff can be done or can be designed. So I think that from this perspective, what the Fab Lab can offer is quite interesting. I'm convinced that the movement by itself cannot go cannot achieve completely the vision. We need other people with different competencies, because there are still a lot of open points.
Thank you, Patricia. And Rodrigo, I want to give you a chance to jump in here if you wish, just to comment on these questions and anything that's come up in the panel so far. Oh.
Thank you. I think after the coronavirus pandemic, we began to value the cosmovision or worldview or philosophy of our native peoples. We have, as you know, we have a huge difference in our stage of development. And I just want to share with you some document of ICLAC that says that almost 215 million people will remain in poverty in 2020 in Latin America. This is about 35% of the population, of which 83 million would be in a condition of extreme poverty in which the most basic needs are not covered. I said that because we are trying to think like our past people, trying to use a philosophy named good living, life simple. And I think the circular economy is very useful for this kind of life, you know. Patricia showed us many extraordinary pieces that the Fab Lab creates. And I think that is very, it's an inspiration. And I think we can do something like this using our materials, reusing natural source, or I don't know, goods, old goods. It's we are starting a new moment in Latin America, as I told you, and I think these tools will be very useful for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And we have some interesting questions, I think, that build on this. I guess again, the question of contextualizing some of these ideas, for example, are some of these, the open source sharing of ideas across space so that you don't have to move materials and so on, or all of the ideas of waste reduction and more that go in to the circular economy. What are they in service of? So I'm really glad, Rodrigo, you contextualize that to ask us to consider the links with these concepts like volunteer simplicity or buen vivir in Latin America. And we have other questions here about a reference to library socialism, or creating spaces for sharing, long-term sharing through library commons type library situations, or the right to repair. Is this integrated also with ideas that get rid of planned obsolescence and are there alternatives to embedding these ideas into a growth insistent economy, which is part of the fabric of the SDGs, part of the fabric of the European Union treaties, and yet the ideas I think we're talking about here can translate, can transcend some of those things if there's some intentionality with it. I just want you to hold those. Katie Kish does so much good work on this, and has her a long experience with maker communities and so on. Katie, I wonder if you want to just jump in here. I just want to give you that opportunity to sort of maybe respond a little there and expand on some of the questions you posted. You want to do that?
Hi, sure. I mean, I think that the big thing, the big sort of message that, it wasn't in the questions, but to one of the points that was just made, that Fab Labs are fantastic. I'm a big supporter. I think they're really great places for innovation. And they have a really great history. They're part of one much larger movement across the world that's bringing maker spaces and these tool libraries, these spaces for sharing and for community all together. They're a much more, and I really see them as like the innovation and technological basis for that, which is really important. Whereas maker spaces, which is where most of my expertise is, they're much more about the community, and they're using that technology, and sometimes they're making it, sometimes they're just improving on it. But either way, this whole movement there's tons of research that demonstrates that it is the circular economy in action. They're using other resources that people are throwing away. They're repurposing them. They're recycling them. They're doing really fantastic jobs at using materials to their greatest extent, and on using locally sourced materials. And when we hear the phrase, making what people want when they want it, that sounds, like a problem in terms of restriction and, getting people to consume less. But that's actually a really good thing, because right now, the way that production is done is that you produce 1,000 units, not knowing how much anybody wants. And then half of that stuff just gets taken to the landfill. So if you're making what people actually want when they actually want it, you're reducing a lot of that unnecessary production. And so it really responds in that way as well. So Catherine asked in the chat about how do these things reduce consumption and production. That's one way. The other way is that these systems, Fab Labs, maker spaces, tool libraries, all of them, they provide this really good sense of meaning for the people who are there. There's pride in the production, there's pride in what they produce. And then when they sell that good, the person who consumes it, there's been research that shows they feel like they've consumed something that has a higher ethical quality to it. And then they don't want to consume, it makes them want to consume that kind of thing more often, and to consume mass produced materials less often. And so then they're buying fewer things that are produced with these better ethics in mind. And so it's having this chain effect on the consumer, but also on the producer, because they have this pride in making. And then just community orientation in general is helping people to just, that's one way. There's a line of argument that the lack of community and the focus on the individual and individualization is what really makes people consume a lot, because you're comparing yourselves to your neighbors instead of consuming with your neighbor, instead of being in a relationship of sharing with them. And so it also helps to combat some of that individualization that we see. So, I mean, this whole movement of makers and Fab Labs and stuff, it's hard to say how big it is, but it's not hard to say that it's quite significant.
Well, thank you so much, Katie, because I think that puts some of the conversation here into this context and starts to answer some of the questions that Massimiliano was raising about, the context is important, and having, this dialogical approach, this community-driven approach that is in some sense an antidote or a counter to commodification or commercialization for profit, for example. That's why my ears, and I think, perk up when we hear things about open sourcing or or what you brought in about ways of sharing through libraries or so on. Not Airbnb sharing, true sharing. You know, maybe the answers to those questions that Massimiliano begin to the questions that Massimiliano posed are starting to get some answers through that kind of thinking. I'd like to give everybody, all the panelists, maybe just a chance here for some closing thoughts, taking into account the full conversation we've had. Massimiliano, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, just a few remarks. I'm sorry, maybe we're not able to answer all the questions, but I just browsing through the question, I want to maybe make a couple of points. I'm really very glad about this idea of the community-driven approach to circular economy. I think if we look at the circular economy not only as a new way to create goods in a traditional way, let's say, which might be good in terms of reducing weight, but it's not obviously enough. And if we look at the needs of the local communities, I think it's a very good idea. And I think it's worth exploring that. It's worth, let's say, making the Fab Labs better known and improving this connection, sharing ideas. And obviously this can be a way of going towards an ecological approach as we are advocating. And I think this may develop obviously in a different way in Latin America as compared to Europe or other parts of the world, but that's the way it should be. I mean, it should be also accustomed to the local need and to the local tradition. So I think this is part of also the right mindset. And it should be also about, there was a question that we didn't answer, it's also about reusing and repairing, for example. In Europe, for example, the European Commission puts in the plans about circular economy that we should work on reusing and repairing along with recycling. The problem is that most people in Europe, for example, have completely lost the mindset that you need for reusing, sharing, and repairing. I don't want to say that there are not people thinking about that, but they're certainly not the majority. I don't know what is the situation in other parts of the world. So you can think about that in very small local communities about sharing, but certainly you cannot do that easily at a global scale. So there you need probably the law to go towards certain direction, but you also need a public understanding of going back to an approach which is different, and when you don't need to own products, you can share products, you can reuse products. And so I think this is really the Fab Labs and maybe our efforts on a different legal approach, which is also an ethical approach and an economic approach, can meet somewhere along this way. So I'm very glad about our discussion, and I hope this can be a good start for further thoughts about that.
Thanks, Massimiliano. I sold my car, finally sold my car last year, and I'm using a car sharing service, and I feel so liberated. I love it. Rodrigo, let me turn to you for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Geoffrey. My last message is about COP26. My sensation is, and my message is not to surrender to the confusing results of COP26 and to think together a new development model based on solidarity specifically, in which the circular economy can have a place to face the civilizing challenge of climate change. We are in big problems at the moment, and we have to think and work together to resolve to this situation. We have a wonderful work for all of us, and we have to face to big companies, to face to rich countries in our position, of course. I think I cannot finish my participation here without sharing with you this message. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rodrigo, and it's a very important one. Thanks for underscoring that. And Patricia, final thoughts from you, please.
Yes, I would like to thank Kathy for for her intervention, because she said that, you know, we produce a lot of stuff now, really a lot of stuff that we don't need, and there are people who really need something and no one produce this for them. For example, there is a network that is very interesting. It's called Hackability. It's for people with disability. So people can go in this. There are 2 big fab labs in Italy, in Turin and in Milan. And they run workshop with people with disability, and these people go there to design the prosthesis or stuff that they need, and they are not present on the market. And when a nice solution is designed and produced for these people in hackability, companies are not interested in producing those kind of solutions, because they want to produce just stuff that, of course, they can sell to a lot of people. And in the Fab Lab, you do something that is perfect for few people. So this is an issue, and I think this is something that we should really address somewhere. There are 2 extremes right now, and maybe we should try to find ways to scale up solutions that are developed in Fab Labs and make companies interested in this kind of new design, new co-creation, because this is what people really want. This is really human-centered.
Thank you, Patricia. Yeah, and you know, the word regenerative, which we also associate with a lot of this, really seems relevant here. Making the circular economy, making these new technologies regenerative and of true service to people in need certainly seems consistent with ecological law. Thank you so much for a really interesting discussion today. Our next discussion will be on December 21st on the theme of ecological law and governance and peace. So please join us for that. And again, thanks to all of you who joined us today. We will be posting a recording of this to be shared in the coming days. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks
Get
a lot.
home,
Bye-bye.
get home safe, Rodrigo.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.